I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. What I'm about to tell you saved my life, and it might save yours, too. At Morrison's grocery on a snowy December afternoon, I helped an elderly woman pay for her groceries. She grabbed my arm and whispered urgently, "When your son leaves tonight, don't touch the snow in your yard. Your life depends on it." I thought she was confused. The next morning I found footprints circling my house. Someone had tried to break in while I slept. What I discovered next shattered everything I thought I knew about my own son. The first snowflakes started falling around 3 o'clock that Tuesday afternoon, fat and lazy, drifting past the windows of Morrison's grocery like they had all the time in the world. I stood in line behind 5 other customers, my small basket resting against my hip. At 70 years old, you learn to appreciate the little neighborhood stores, the kind where the cashier knows your name, and nobody rushes you while you're counting out exact change. Morrison's had been on this corner of Maple and 5th Street in Burlington, Vermont for 43 years. The wooden floors still creaked in the same spots. The bell above the door still chimed the same 2 notes. After Robert died 5 years ago, these small familiarities became anchors in a world that suddenly felt too big and too empty. I'd picked up the usual items: chicken breast, fresh green beans, a loaf of whole wheat bread, and the good coffee Robert always said was too expensive, but worth every penny. My monthly budget was tight, $1,847 from Social Security, and a small pension from Robert's 28 years at the paper mill. But I managed. I always managed. The woman in front of me was counting coins onto the counter with trembling arthritic fingers. She looked to be about my age, maybe older, wearing a threadbare wool coat that had seen better decades, and a faded floral scarf wrapped twice around her thin neck. Her groceries sat on the belt between us: 1 small loaf of generic white bread, a quart of milk, 3 russet potatoes, and a single yellow onion. That was it. 4 items, the kind of order that tells a story all by itself. "Ma'am, you're still short about $15, Ashley said gently. Ashley was the young cashier who always worked Tuesday afternoons, early 20s, nose ring, genuinely kind heart. She'd helped me carry my groceries to the car more than once when my arthritis was acting up. But I counted twice at home. The old woman said, her voice paper thin and confused. I had enough. I'm sure I had enough. Behind me, someone sighed loudly. I heard a shopping cart shift impatiently. The line was growing 7 people now, all wanting to get home before the storm got worse. I looked at that hunched figure, at her red-chapped hands, still sorting through pennies and nickels, at those 4 pathetic items that would barely get her through 3 days. The voice in my head sounded exactly like Robert Eleanor. We always had more than enough. Always help when you can. Ring it up with mine, sweetheart, I said, placing a $20 bill on the counter before Ashley could total the woman's groceries separately. Oh no, dear, you really don't have to. The old woman turned toward me and our eyes met. That's when everything changed. Her eyes weren't cloudy or distant like you'd expect from someone her age. They were clear as winter sky, sharp as broken glass, and they looked straight through me in a way that made my breath catch in my throat. There was something ancient in that stare, something that had seen things, terrible things, impossible things, and somehow knew things about me that I didn't even know about myself. Thank you, dear, she said quietly, but her grip on my sleeve was surprisingly strong. Your kindness won't be forgotten. She gathered her small bag of groceries with one hand, but her other hand stayed locked on my forearm. The store seemed to go quiet around us, even though I could still hear the scanner beeping and the murmur of other conversations. She leaned in close. I smelled mothballs and dried lavender, and something else I couldn't quite place. Maybe wood smoke, maybe just the cold. Listen very carefully, she whispered, her voice low and urgent. When your son leaves tonight, do not touch the snow in your yard. I blinked. I'm sorry, what? Her fingers dug into my sleeve. No matter what he tells you, don't shovel until morning. Don't walk in it. Don't disturb it at all. I don't understand. Your life depends on it. Her eyes bored into mine with an intensity that made my stomach clench. Promise me. My mouth felt dry. Okay, I promise. She searched my face for another long moment, then nodded once satisfied. She released my arm and moved toward the exit with surprising speed for someone who'd seemed so frail moments before. The automatic doors whooshed open and she disappeared into the swirling white curtain of snow like she'd been absorbed into it. Mr. Lawson, Ashley's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you okay?" I realized I was standing frozen, staring at the empty doorway. My heart was hammering against my ribs. "Fine," I said, shaking my head. "I'm fine," but I wasn't fine. My hands shook slightly as I paid for my groceries and gathered my 2 bags. As I pushed through the doors into the December cold, one question circled through my mind over and over. How did she know Miles was coming tonight? The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm as I drove the 6 blocks home to Birch Street. The snow was falling harder now, already starting to accumulate on the roads. My ancient Honda Civic, 22 years old and still running, thank God crawled through the white at 15 miles per hour. I hadn't told anyone that Miles was visiting. He'd called that morning at 8:47 a.m. I remembered the time because I'd been in the middle of my coffee, surprised enough by the caller ID to check the clock. "Hi, Mom." His voice had sounded strange, tight. "I need to stop by tonight after work. Is that okay?" "Of course, honey. Is everything all right?" Yeah, just, I need to talk to you about something. I'll be there around 6:30. It was the first time he'd called in 4 months. 4 months of me leaving voicemails that went unreturned, of text messages that got one-word responses days later. 4 months of pretending it didn't hurt that my only child seemed to have better things to do than check on his widowed mother. But I never stopped making excuses for him. Miles is busy. Miles has a demanding job. Miles is building his career. The same excuses I'd been making since he was a teenager, when busy meant sleeping until 2 p.m. and demanding meant his video game tournament schedule. Robert used to say I coddled the boy. "Eleanor, you're not doing him any favors by letting him off the hook for everything." But what was I supposed to do? After Robert died when Miles was only 8 years old, he was all I had left. We were all each other had. I pulled into my driveway at 47 Birch Street, the 2-story Victorian that Robert and I had bought in 1978 for $42,000. Now it was worth over $650,000 according to the property assessment that came last month. The neighborhood had changed. Young professionals were moving in, renovating, putting up those modern barn lights and painting everything gray. Our house still had the original blue-gray siding and white trim. The front porch still had the swing where I used to read to Miles when he was little. The oak tree in the front yard was the one Miles climbed when he was 12 and got stuck, and I had to call the fire department. He was so embarrassed, but the firefighters were kind about it. I gathered my grocery bags and trudged up the front walk, my boots crunching in the thin layer of new snow. The porch light flickered on the timer I'd set it to because coming home to a dark house felt too much like failure, like admission that I was alone. Inside, I kicked snow off my boots and hung my coat on the hook by the door. The house was quiet except for the furnace humming in the basement and the old grandfather clock in the living room ticking away the seconds of my life. I put the groceries away, started water for tea, and sat at the kitchen table where I could see both the front window and the back door. The snow was really coming down now. We'd have 6 inches by morning at least. The old woman's words echoed in my head. "When your son leaves tonight, do not touch the snow in your yard." But how had she known Miles was coming? I hadn't told a soul. Had I mentioned it to someone and forgotten? No, I was certain. The only person who knew was Miles, and I'd only found out that morning. I wrapped my hands around my tea mug, seeking warmth. Maybe she was just a confused old woman making random statements that happened to sound prophetic. Old age did strange things to the mind. I'd seen it with Robert's mother before she passed, convinced the neighbors were stealing her newspapers, certain that her long-dead sister was visiting her at night. But those eyes... God, those eyes hadn't looked confused. They'd looked like they knew exactly what they were saying, like they'd seen what was coming and were trying to warn me. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the winter weather. Headlights swept across my living room wall, bright against the early darkness. I stood up from the couch where I'd been pretending to watch the evening news, my heart already beating faster. Miles's black Audi sedan he'd bought it 2 years ago, and I remembered thinking it must have cost at least $40,000 pulled into the driveway. I opened the front door before he could knock, cold air rushing past me, into the warm house. "Miles, come in, sweetheart. You'll freeze out there." "Can't stay long, Mom." He stepped inside but didn't take off his jacket, didn't hug me, just stood in the entryway shaking snow from his shoulders and pulling off his leather gloves. At 38, Miles had grown into someone I barely recognized. The soft-faced boy who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms had hardened into this sharp-featured man who always seemed to be looking past me through me towards something more important, just beyond reach. He was thinner than the last time I'd seen him Thanksgiving, when he'd stayed for exactly 90 minutes before claiming he had another dinner to get to. His sandy hair, so much like Robert's, was shorter now, almost severe. And he had that phone in his hand the way he always did, thumb-scrolling even as he stood in my hallway. "I've got a work trip," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Leaving in about an hour. Just wanted to check on you before I go." "That's thoughtful." I tried to keep the surprise out of my voice and failed. "How long will you be gone?" "Week, maybe 10 days. His gaze drifted around the living room, skimming over the photos of Robert on the mantel, the Afghan I was knitting draped over the couch, the stack of library books on the end table. Then his eyes moved to the window overlooking the backyard. "Roads are getting bad," he said. "They'll plow by morning, but your driveway—" He turned to look at me, and something in his expression made me uneasy. "Dad, you need to shovel the driveway tonight before it gets worse." I hadn't asked him to call me Dad. That's what he'd called Robert. For me, it had always been Mom, even after Robert died. "Tonight," I said. "Miles, it's still coming down. I'll do it in the morning when it stops." "No." His voice had an edge that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. "Do it tonight. You're not getting any younger, and if something happens, if you fall, if you have a heart attack or something, emergency services need to be able to get in." The concern seemed rehearsed, too specific, too insistent. "I'll be fine," I said slowly. "I've shoveled snow for 50 years. Will you—" He stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of his cologne, something expensive and unfamiliar. "You'll be here alone, right? No one checking on you. The Andersons next door are in Florida, aren't they?" My breath caught. "How did you know that?" "I called them last week." He said it casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Just making sure someone was keeping an eye on you." But Miles had never called the Andersons in his life, had never shown the slightest interest in my neighborhood or who lived around me. The Andersons had been our neighbors for 35 years, and Miles couldn't pick them out of a lineup. "I can take care of myself," I said, and hated how defensive I sounded. "Can you—" Something flickered across his face. Was it desperation? "Just shovel the driveway, Mom. Please, before you go to bed tonight." He checked his phone again, frowned. "I have to go. Flight's early tomorrow." "Flight? I thought you said it was a work trip by car." There was a beat of hesitation, barely noticeable. "Driving to Boston tonight, flying out from there. Client meeting in Chicago." He moved toward the door and I followed. Something felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. The way he wouldn't look at me directly. The questions about the Andersons. The desperate edge in his voice when he said, "Please." "Miles, is everything all right?" "Really?" "Fine. Just stressed with work." He paused at the threshold, one hand on the door frame. For a moment, just a flash, I saw something in his eyes that looked like fear, or maybe guilt. "Promise me you'll shovel tonight. When your son leaves tonight, do not touch the snow in your yard." The old woman's warning rang like an alarm bell in my head. "I'll think about it," I said. "Mom," there was frustration in his voice now, maybe even anger. "It's for your own safety. Just do it. Okay? Drive safe, son." He stared at me, jaw tight, and I could see him weighing whether to push harder. Then he turned and walked quickly to his car, his expensive shoes slipping slightly on the snowy walkway. I watched his taillights disappear into the white curtain of falling snow standing in the doorway until the cold made my bones ache. Then I closed the door, locked it, and stood in my dim hallway listening to the house creak and settle around me. Miles's visit felt wrong. The insistence about the driveway felt wrong. The questions about who would be checking on me felt very, very wrong. I walked to the back window and looked out at my yard. The snow was pristine and unmarked, beautiful in its untouched witness. My shovel leaned against the garage wall, easily accessible. It would take me maybe 30 minutes to clear the driveway. Miles was right that I wasn't getting any younger. My back hurt on good days, and this cold made my arthritis flare up something fierce. But the old woman's words kept circling through my mind, mixing with Miles's strange behavior, his odd questions, that desperate edge in his voice. "Your life depends on it." I left the shovel where it was. I went to bed at my usual time, 10:30 p.m., but sleep wouldn't come. I lay in the dark of my bedroom on the second floor, listening to the wind howl around the corners of the house and snow pelt against the windows. The old radiator clanked and hissed a sound that usually comforted me, but tonight seemed ominous. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. I kept thinking about Miles, about the boy he used to be. When Robert died, Miles was only 8 years old, too young to really understand that his father wasn't coming back. I remember him standing at Robert's funeral in his little suit, the one we'd bought just for that day, tears streaming down his face as he clung to my hand. "Is Daddy going to heaven?" he'd asked me that night when I tucked him in. "Yes, sweetheart." "Will he be able to see us from there?" "Always. He'll always be watching over us." "Don't leave me too, Mommy. Promise you won't leave me." I'd held him while he cried himself to sleep, and I'd promised. "I'll always be here, baby. Always." For years after that, Miles was terrified of being alone. He slept with a nightlight until he was 12. He needed me to be home when he got back from school. He got anxious if I was even 10 minutes late picking him up. I indulged it all. Overprotected him, Robert's mother had said. Coddled him. But what was I supposed to do? He'd lost his father. I was all he had left. Somewhere along the way, the scared little boy who needed me desperately became a teenager who barely tolerated me. Then a young man who seemed embarrassed by me. And finally the stranger who'd stood in my hallway tonight checking his phone while demanding I shovel snow. When had it changed? When had I stopped being his safe place and become his burden? I rolled over, punched my pillow, tried to find a comfortable position. The clock on my nightstand read 11:47 p.m. in glowing red numbers. Outside, the storm had finally stopped. The wind had died down to occasional gusts. Through the gap in my curtains, I could see the streetlight on the corner casting an orange glow over the fresh snow. My eyes were just starting to drift closed when I heard something. A car engine. Close. Very close. I sat up, my heart suddenly pounding. Crept to the window and peeked through the curtain. A dark sedan was rolling slowly down Birch Street. No headlights. Just a dark shape moving through the orange-lit night like a predator. It stopped. Right in front of my house. I pulled back from the window, my breath coming fast and shallow. This was nothing. Just a neighbor. Someone lost. A car door opened and closed. Quiet. Careful. I looked again. A man stood on the sidewalk. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Wearing a dark jacket and a knit cap pulled low. He looked both ways down the empty street, moving his head with the methodical deliberation of someone who knew what they were doing. Then he walked toward my house. Not up the front walk. Through the side yard toward the gate that led to my backyard. I stood frozen, watching him disappear around the side of my house. My phone was downstairs in my purse. I was alone on the second floor in a neighborhood where the houses were just far enough apart that screaming wouldn't help. 12 minutes passed. I counted them on the clock. 12 minutes where I stood at my window, barely breathing, wondering if I should run downstairs and call 911. Then he reappeared, walking back with the same unhurried confidence. Got in his car. The engine started, still no headlights, and he drove away. I sat on the edge of my bed, shaking. My hands were trembling so badly I had to clasp them together to make them stop. Someone had just walked around my house, in the middle of the night, during a blizzard, and Miles had wanted me to erase the evidence. Because if I'd shoveled the driveway tonight like he'd begged me to, like he'd practically demanded my footprints would be everywhere, any other footprints would just blend in. I'd never know someone had been here. When your son leaves tonight, do not touch the snow in your yard. Your life depends on it. The old woman had saved me. But from what and how? How in God's name had she known I didn't sleep for the rest of the night? Just sat in my bed with the lamp on, watching the snow outside my window slowly turn from gray to pink as dawn approached, waiting for morning, when I could see what that man had been doing in my yard. The silence after a blizzard is profound. The world holds its breath beneath its white blanket, muffling every sound, making everything feel both peaceful and unsettling. I'd been awake all night, but I still jolted when my alarm went off at 6:30 a.m. My back ached as I shuffled to the bathroom. A night of sitting rigid in bed hadn't done my arthritis any favors. I splashed water on my face, avoiding my reflection. I looked like I felt exhausted, scared old. Downstairs, I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. My hands were still shaking. I gripped the counter to steady myself, taking deep breaths the way the grief counselor had taught me after Robert died. In for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Out for 4. The window over my sink faced the backyard. As the kettle began to warm, I looked out. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Deep clear prints cutting through the pristine snow in my backyard, destroying its perfect white surface like a violation. Not mine. I hadn't been outside since yesterday afternoon, not the mailman's. These came from the side gate, not the front walkway where the mail slot was. My hand froze on the curtain. The tracks led from the gate straight toward the house, then began a methodical circle around the entire perimeter. They stopped at every ground floor window. The living room. The kitchen where I now stood, separated from those prints by just a pane of glass. Around to the side where the laundry room was. Then to the back where my bedroom window faced the yard. I forced my legs to move, walking on autopilot to the back window. My stomach lurched. The footprints came right up to the glass. Close enough that whoever made them could have looked inside, could have seen me sleeping if I hadn't closed the curtains last night. And there my breath caught marks in the snow beneath the window frame. Scuff marks, drag marks, like someone had tested the window, tried to lift it, checked if it was locked. The prints were huge, size 13, maybe larger. Deep impressions that spoke of a heavy man, someone substantial and strong. The stride was wide, confident, deliberate. Someone had walked around my house last night while I slept, checking windows, testing locks, looking for a way in. And if that bedroom window had been unlocked, if I'd been the kind of person who didn't double-check everything, the kind of person who felt safe enough to leave windows unlatched, the kettle started to shriek and I jumped like I'd been shot, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I turned off the burner with shaking hands. My phone. Where was my phone? I found it on the counter where I'd left it last night, battery at 43%. My fingers fumbled with the passcode twice before getting it right. Lieutenant Samuel Crawford. He'd been the community officer for our neighborhood for 20 years. He'd come to Robert's funeral. He'd checked on me during those first terrible months after making sure I was eating, making sure I wasn't sitting alone in the dark too much. Good man. Solid. Someone you could trust. I pulled up his number. My thumb hovered over the call button. This wasn't some teenage prank. Those weren't kids' footprints. This was something else. Something that made my gut twist with a fear I hadn't felt since the night Robert died in the hospital, and I had to drive home alone knowing I was returning to an empty house forever, and miles numb. I couldn't think about that yet. Couldn't let my mind go there. I pressed dial. The phone rang once, twice. Crawford, his familiar voice, steady, calm, reassuring, made something inside me crack. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. Samuel, it's Eleanor Lawson. I need you to come over. I paused, steadied myself. Someone was in my yard last night, and I think they were trying to get inside. Lieutenant Crawford's cruiser pulled up within 20 minutes, lights off, but engine running, exhaust puffing white in the cold morning air. He stepped out in his dark blue uniform and heavy winter jacket, a tall black man in his early 50s with a military bearing and kind eyes that had seen pretty much everything Burlington, Vermont had to offer in terms of human nature. Mrs. Lawson, he said, shaking my hand firmly at the door. His hand was warm and steady. Mine was neither. Show me. I led him through the house to the back window. He stood where I'd stood, studying the yard, his expression shifting from concerned to grim. I'll need to take a closer look. He pulled latex gloves from his pocket, always prepared, always professional, and headed outside. I watched from the window as he crouched by the tracks, first examining them, then taking photos with his phone. He followed the path the intruder had taken from the gate to the house around the entire perimeter, pausing at each window for a long time. At my bedroom window, he got down on one knee in the snow, his face very close to the ground, examining the scuff marks I'd seen. When he came back inside, stamping snow from his boots on the mat, his expression was serious. Size 13 or 14 boots, heavy tread tactical or work boots. He pulled off his gloves. This man weighs at least 220 pounds, probably more. And Mrs. Lawson, he looked at me directly. This wasn't random. He was checking every entry point systematically. This was reconnaissance. My knees felt weak. I sat down heavily at my kitchen table. Reconnaissance for what? To see which ones were vulnerable, which windows didn't have locks that engaged properly, whether you had a security system, whether you live alone. He pulled out his notebook. You lock your windows at night. Always. Ever since Robert passed away, I check every single one before bed. Good. That probably saved you. He wrote something down. Your neighbor across the street, Mrs. Fletcher. She's got a security camera, doesn't she? I've seen it. Rosemary. Yes, she installed it last year after her daughter insisted. Let's go talk to her. Rosemary Fletcher opened her door in a quilted bathrobe, her short gray hair still messy from sleep. Her eyes widened when she saw Crawford's uniform. Eleanor, what on earth? I'm sorry to bother you so early, Rosemary. We need to check your security camera from last night. Of course. Come in, come in. She ushered us into her living room, which was decorated exactly like you'd expect from a 72-year-old woman who'd lived in the same house for 40 years. Doilies on every surface, photos of grandchildren on the mantel, and a television that was definitely older than my car. She fumbled with the camera app on her tablet. Her daughter had set it all up, she explained, and she wasn't always sure how to work it. But eventually, she had it pulled up on her TV screen. Crawford took the remote. What time did you go to bed, Mrs. Fletcher? Oh, around 10:30. I read for a while, so maybe asleep by 11. We'll start there. He rewound through hours of empty street and falling snow, the timestamp in the corner ticking backward. 11:50 p.m., 11:48 p.m., 11:47 p.m. There. Crawford froze the image. A dark sedan rolled slowly down Birch Street. No headlights, just as I'd seen. It stopped in front of my house. You could see the Victorian's distinctive porch clearly in the frame. A man got out. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket and a knit cap pulled low over his face. He looked both ways with that same methodical care I'd witnessed then, walked directly to my gate, opening it without hesitation, like he knew exactly where he was going. He's done this before, Crawford muttered. Look at that movement, confident, practiced. He knows what he's doing. The timestamp showed the man disappearing into my yard. Then nothing. Just the empty street and falling snow and my house sitting there looking peaceful and safe. 8 minutes passed. 10, 12. Then he reappeared, walking back to his car with the same unhurried confidence. He got in and the sedan pulled away still without headlights, disappearing down Birch Street toward the main road. Back it up, Crawford said, to when he's getting in the car. Rosemary rewound. Crawford leaned close to the screen. Can you zoom in? The image pixelated as Rosemary fumbled with the zoom function, but you could make out part of the license plate. VT something 8427. Vermont plates. And there on the door, Crawford pointed. See that there's a logo or lettering. Too blurry to read, but it's a rental car, I said quietly. That's the logo for budget rental. Both of them looked at me. I recognize it from when Miles had to rent a car last year when his was in the shop. Same style logo on the door. Crawford pulled out his phone and started taking pictures of the TV screen. Mrs. Fletcher, I need you to email this footage to the police department right away. I'll give you the address. Is Eleanor in danger? Rosemary's voice shook. We're going to make sure she isn't. Crawford turned to me. Mrs. Lawson, let's go back to your house. I have some questions. We sat at my kitchen table, the same one where Robert and I had eaten breakfast every morning for 37 years, where I'd helped Miles with his homework, where I'd signed the papers that made me a widow at 65. Crawford had his notebook, open pen poised. Has anyone been to your house recently? Anyone unusual? Any strangers, solicitors, repair people? Miles's face flashed in my mind. His desperate insistence about the driveway. His questions about who would be checking on me. My son stopped by yesterday evening, I said slowly. Each word felt like a betrayal. First time in 4 months. Crawford's pen paused. What time? Around 6:30. He only stayed maybe 15 minutes. And what did you talk about? I swallowed hard. He said he had a work trip, had to leave soon, but he was very, I searched for the right word, insistent that I shovel my driveway last night. Kept pushing me about it, getting upset when I said I'd wait until morning. The silence was heavy. Crawford wrote something in his notebook, and I could see him making connections I didn't want to acknowledge. Did he say anything else unusual? Ask any odd questions? He asked if the Andersons were in Florida. Said he'd called them last week to make sure someone was checking on me. My voice cracked. But Miles has never shown any interest in my neighbors before. He wouldn't recognize the Andersons if they were standing right in front of him. Crawford set down his pen and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Pity, maybe, or concern. Mrs. Lawson, I have to ask this. Do you think your son might have been trying to... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Do you think he wanted you to shovel so that any footprints in your yard would be disturbed, so you wouldn't notice if someone else had been here? The question hung in the air between us. My throat felt tight. I don't know what to think anymore. What's your son's financial situation? Do you know if he's having any money problems? Miles has never been good with money. The admission hurt. When he was younger, I helped him out sometimes, small amounts. But the last few years, I stopped. We haven't been close. Crawford's radio crackled. He stepped away, spoke in low tones with someone, then came back to the table. I'm running the partial plate and that budget rental logo through the system, he said. In the meantime, I'm having a patrol car swing by every hour tonight. Keep your doors locked, all of them, including the garage door into the house. Don't open for anyone you don't know. You think he'll come back? My voice was barely a whisper. Crawford looked at the security footage frozen on Rosemary's TV screen, visible through my kitchen window. The dark figure, the deliberate movements, the methodical checking of every window. Men like this don't give up after one look, he said quietly. We need to find out who he is. Fast, before he comes back with a plan. After Crawford left, I sat at that table for a long time staring at nothing. The house was quiet except for the furnace and the clock and the sound of my own breathing. Someone had been hired to get into my house. And Miles' number, and I couldn't think it. Wouldn't think it. But the thought was there anyway, cold and terrible, settling into my chest like ice. What if my own son wanted me dead? I couldn't eat breakfast. Couldn't do anything but sit at my kitchen table watching the patrol car that Crawford had stationed outside my house. Officer Brennan, a young woman in her late 20s with her hair pulled back in a tight bun, sat in the cruiser occasionally checking her phone, but mostly just watching my house and the street. The phone rang at 12:47 p.m. Crawford's number. Mrs. Lawson, we got a hit on that license plate. His voice was grim. Can you come down to the station? There's something you need to see. The police station smelled like old coffee and industrial cleaner. Crawford met me in the lobby and led me to a small conference room with a table, 3 chairs, and a window with bars on it. Very reassuring. Sit down, Eleanor. He'd never used my first name before. That alone told me how serious this was. He spread several printed pages across the table. Photos, documents, records. The rental car was leased from Burlington Airport 4 days ago under the name Thomas Bryce. Fake name, fake ID, but the cameras at the rental counter got a clear shot of his face. He slid a photo toward me. A man, early 40s, hard face, cold eyes. The kind of face you'd walk past on the street and immediately forget, which was probably exactly what he wanted. We ran him through the system. His real name is Derek Haynes, 42 years old. He's got a record that goes back 23 years. Crawford laid out more papers like he was dealing cards in a poker game I didn't want to play. Assault with a deadly weapon, New York 2008. Did 3 years. Battery and organized violence, Vermont 2014. Did 5 years. Got out 18 months ago on parole. He paused. Mrs. Lawson, Derek Haynes doesn't do petty crime. He's what you call an enforcer. Someone you hire when you need a problem handled. The room seemed to tilt. Handled. He works for money, takes jobs, and based on his history, Crawford's voice was gentle but firm. He doesn't take small jobs. The kind of people who hire Derek Haynes are the kind who want permanent solutions to their problems. My mouth went dry. You think someone hired him to... I couldn't finish the sentence. We don't know yet. But Eleanor, men like Derek Haynes don't case houses for burglary. They get paid to do things that most people can't stomach. I thought about those footprints again. The methodical way he'd circled my house. The marks under my bedroom window where he'd tested the lock. What does he want with me? I whispered. That's what we're working on. Crawford pulled out another document. We found the motel where he's staying. Pine Grove Motor Inn off Route 7. Checked in 3 days ago, right before your son's visit, under that same fake name. Paid cash. Desk clerk identified him from this photo. 3 days ago. The same day I'd met that old woman at Morrison's grocery. When your son leaves tonight, do not touch the snow in your yard. How had she known? How could anyone have known? There's more, Crawford said. We pulled his phone records, the burner phone he's been using. He made a call last night at 11:30 p.m. right before he showed up at your house. To who? We're still tracing it. But someone gave him the go-ahead. Someone told him it was time to move. My hands were shaking. I clasped them together in my lap, trying to hold myself together. Samuel, please just tell me. Do you think... I had to force the words out. Do you think Miles is involved in this? Crawford looked at me for a long moment. In his eyes, I saw the answer before he spoke. I don't know yet, but I need to ask you some hard questions, and I need honest answers. Can you do that for me? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Does Miles have any financial problems that you know of? Debts, money trouble? I thought about the last few years, the times Miles had canceled plans because he was busy with work, the way he'd stopped asking to borrow money after I'd said no that one time, the distance that had grown between us like a canyon I couldn't cross. I don't know, I admitted. We haven't been close. He doesn't tell me things anymore. What about your house? Have you and Miles ever discussed what happens to it when... He stopped himself. Have you talked about inheritance? A cold finger traced down my spine. Not really. I mean, he knows he's my only child. Everything I have goes to him. But I never thought, how much is your house worth? The assessment last month said $650,000. I nearly fainted when I saw it. Robert and I bought it for $42,000 back in 1978. Crawford wrote something down. And you're 70 years old living alone on a fixed income. Social Security and Robert's pension, about $850 a month. But if something happened to you, Miles would inherit the house. He could sell it, pay off any debts, have a fresh start. The words hung in the air like an accusation I didn't want to hear. He wouldn't, I said, but my voice was hollow. He's my son. He wouldn't. My phone buzzed in my purse. Both Crawford and I looked at it. Unknown number. Answer it, Crawford said quietly. Put it on speaker. My hand shook as I accepted the call and tapped the speaker icon. Hello? Mrs. Lawson. A man's voice. Deep, gravelly, not Miles. You have a beautiful house on Birch Street. Shame you live there all alone. That's not very safe, is it? My blood turned to ice. Crawford was already signaling to someone outside the room. Who is this? I managed to say. I'm the man who took a walk around your house last night. Nice bedroom you have. Pretty blue curtains. You were sleeping so peacefully. I couldn't breathe. Crawford's hand was on my shoulder, steady and grounding. What do you want? My voice cracked. I wanted you to know something, Mrs. Lawson. I wanted you to know that window, the one in your bedroom. The lock is a little loose. Real easy to open from the outside if you know how. Why are you telling me this? There was a pause. When he spoke again, his voice was different, quieter, almost sad. Because I'm not going to do it. I took the job, I took the money, but I'm not going to hurt you. What job? What money? You seem like a good woman. You don't deserve this. So I'm calling to warn you someone else will come, and they won't have my conscience. Who hired you? Please, you have to tell me. Ask your son about his gambling debts. Ask him about the $240,000 he owes to people who don't forgive debts. Ask him what he's willing to do for $650,000. The line went dead. I stared at the phone. Crawford was already on his radio barking orders about tracing the call, but I barely heard him. $240,000 in gambling debts. $650,000 house. Miles. My son. My baby boy. They caught Derek Haynes at 2:43 p.m. at the Pine Grove Motor Inn just as he was loading a duffel bag into the trunk of his rental car. Crawford called me with the news. We've got him, Eleanor. He's in custody. No resistance. Did he have... I couldn't finish. A duffel bag with gloves, lockpicks, a knife, zip ties, and duct tape. He wasn't planning a friendly visit. Crawford paused. But here's the thing. He also had $8,000 in cash in an envelope in his room. Seems like he was planning to return it to someone. The money he was paid, that's what he's claiming. Says he changed his mind about the job. Detective Clark is interviewing him now. He's being very cooperative, almost too cooperative. Says he wants to make a deal. Can I stopped unsure what I was even asking for. Can I be there? Are you sure you want to hear what he has to say? No, I wasn't sure, but I needed to know. Yes. The interrogation room had a one-way mirror. I stood behind it with Crawford watching Detective Amanda Clark sit across from Derek Haynes. Up close on this side of the glass, Derek looked older than his photo. Tired. There were lines around his eyes and gray in his stubble. Clark was in her mid-30s, sharp-eyed, wearing a blazer, and her dark hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. Mr. Haynes, you're being very cooperative, she said. Why is that? Derek leaned back in his chair, handcuffed hands resting on the metal table. Because I'm tired, Detective. Tired of being the kind of man I've become. And because that woman, Mrs. Lawson, she doesn't deserve what was supposed to happen to her. Tell me about the job. I was contacted about 10 days ago through a secured messaging app. Someone needed a situation handled. Their words, not mine. They wanted it to look natural, an accident, a fall, maybe a home invasion gone wrong. The target was elderly, lived alone, wouldn't put up much resistance. My stomach churned. Target. He'd called me a target. Who contacted you? I never met them directly. It was all through a middleman. Lawyer named Jackson Reed. Works at Taylor & Associates downtown. Jackson's helped me before with off-the-books work. He takes a commission, keeps everyone's hands clean. Clark wrote something down. And the payment, $8,000 upfront cash. Another $7,000 when the job was done. Jackson gave me the address, told me the woman would be alone, told me to make it look like an accident or a robbery. When were you supposed to do it? This week, preferably Tuesday night last night. Jackson said the target's son would make sure she was alone and that there'd be no one checking on her. Behind the glass, I felt my knees go weak. Crawford's hand steadied me. The target's son, Clark repeated. Did you get a name? Miles Lawson. Jackson said Miles owed a lot of money to some dangerous people. The house was worth enough to cover it. Miles just needed his mother out of the way sooner rather than later. There it was, spoken out loud. My son had hired someone to kill me. I heard a sound, a wounded animal noise, and realized it came from me. Mrs. Lawson, Crawford's voice was gentle. Do you want to step out? No. I forced myself to stay to hear it all. I owed myself that much. On the other side of the glass, Clark leaned forward. But you didn't do it. Why not? Derek was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. Because I looked through her bedroom window and I saw pictures on her nightstand. Her and her husband smiling happy. Young. And I thought about my wife. Your wife? Sarah. She died 5 years ago in a car accident. Drunk driver. Our daughter was with her. Emma. She was 6. His voice broke slightly. They were going to get ice cream while I was at work. Some bastard ran a red light and killed them both. The room was silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. I've done things I'm not proud of, Detective. But looking at that old woman sleeping peacefully, seeing those pictures of her life, her husband, I couldn't do it. I called Miles that night, told him the job was off, told him I was returning his money. You spoke directly to Miles Lawson? Yeah, around 11:15 last night, right before I went to check her house one last time. Wanted to make sure no one else was there, that she'd be safe. Miles lost his mind. Started screaming at me, calling me unprofessional, saying he'd find someone else who could finish the job. Clark's eyes sharpened. He said he'd find someone else. His exact words were, fine. I'll find someone who's not a coward. Someone who'll actually do what they're paid for. Behind the mirror, Crawford was already pulling out his phone, texting rapidly. Mr. Haynes, do you know if Miles Lawson did hire someone else? I don't know for sure, but a guy like him, desperate like that? Yeah, I'd bet money on it. Crawford pulled me out of the observation room and into the hallway. Eleanor, I need you to listen very carefully. If what Derek says is true, if Miles was angry enough to hire someone else, then you're still in danger. We need to find Miles right now. Do you know where he is? He said he was going on a work trip, driving to Boston, then flying to Chicago. What's his phone number? I gave it to him with shaking hands. Crawford dialed, put it on speaker. It rang, and rang, and rang. Voicemail. Miles's voice, casual and professional. You've reached Miles Lawson. Leave a message. Miles, this is Lieutenant Crawford with Burlington PD. I need you to call me back immediately regarding an urgent matter. This is not optional. He left his number and hung up. We're sending officers to his apartment and his workplace, Crawford said. In the meantime, I'm not comfortable with you going home. Is there somewhere else you can stay? A friend? A relative? I thought about it. My sister lived in Arizona. My closest friend, Margaret, had moved to Florida 2 years ago. I didn't want to impose on Rosemary. I'll go to a hotel. No, we're putting you in a safe house. Just for tonight until we have Miles in custody and we're sure there's no one else coming for you. A safe house. Like I was in witness protection. Like my life had become some kind of crime drama. Except it wasn't a drama. It was real. And my son, the baby I'd rocked to sleep, the boy I'd raised alone after Robert died, the man I'd loved unconditionally even when he'd pushed me away, had paid someone to end my life. The safe house was actually a furnished apartment on the outskirts of Burlington used by the police department for witnesses and people in danger. It was small, bland, and temporary like a hotel room, but with less personality. Beige walls, standard furniture, everything designed to be functional and forgettable. Officer Brennan stayed with me. She made tea, turned on the television, tried to make small talk. Sweet girl, meant well, but I couldn't focus on anything she said. My phone sat on the coffee table in front of me. Crawford had told me to keep it on in case Miles tried to call. He hadn't. At 7:52 p.m., Crawford called instead. Eleanor, we found Miles. He's at Burlington Airport. Looks like he's trying to board a flight. My heart lurched. Where's he going? Mexico City. One-way ticket purchased this morning with cash. We've got officers there now. They're bringing him in for questioning. Mexico. A one-way ticket. Like he was running. Like he knew he'd been caught. I'll call you when we have him at the station, Crawford said. Try to get some rest. Rest. As if I could sleep knowing my son was being arrested. As if I could close my eyes without seeing those footprints in the snow, without hearing Derek's voice saying Miles just needed his mother out of the way. Officer Brennan offered me dinner Chinese takeout that she'd picked up, but I couldn't eat. Could barely drink the tea she'd made. Just sat on that beige couch in that beige room watching the minutes tick by on the clock, waiting for the phone to ring again. At 9:17 p.m. it finally did. We have him, Crawford said. Miles is at the station. He's asking for a lawyer, but he's here. He paused. Do you want to see him? Did I want to see my son, the boy who'd promised to always take care of me, the man who'd hired someone to make sure I'd never need taking care of again? Yes, I whispered. I need to see his face. The police station felt different at night. Quieter. More ominous. Detective Clark met me in the hallway outside the interrogation rooms. Her expression was carefully neutral. Mrs. Lawson, your son is in interrogation room 2. There's an observation room next door with one-way glass. He won't know you're there unless you want him to. Has he said anything? He denies everything. Claims he doesn't know Derek Haynes, doesn't know Jackson Reed, has no idea what we're talking about. But we have phone records, text messages, and a bank transfer. He's lying. She led me to the small, dark observation room. Through the glass, I could see Miles sitting at a metal table, handcuffed. His hair was messy. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked younger somehow, like the scared boy he'd been after Robert died. He looked like my son. Clark entered the interrogation room with another officer. Miles's head snapped up. This is insane, he said immediately. I don't know what you think I did, but this is completely crazy. I want my lawyer. Your lawyer is on the way, Mr. Lawson, but I think you should know what we have. Clark opened a folder and spread documents across the table. Bank transfer from your account to Jackson Reed for $8,000. Text messages between your phone and a burner phone registered to Derek Haynes. Phone records showing 3 calls between you and that number, including one at 11:15 p.m. last night. Miles's face had gone pale. I don't know how. We also have Derek Haynes in custody. He's been very cooperative. Told us all about the job, about how Jackson Reed approached him on your behalf, about how you wanted your mother dead so you could inherit her house and pay off your gambling debts. I didn't. Miles's voice cracked. Okay, yes, I owe money. A lot of money. But I didn't want Mom hurt. I just needed... You needed what? Her $650,000 house? Miles put his head in his hands. His shoulders shook. For a moment I thought he was crying. But when he looked up, his face was twisted with anger, not grief. Do you know what they said they'd do to me? His voice rose. Do you know what happens to people who don't pay what they owe? These aren't credit card companies. These are men who break bones, who make people disappear. I was desperate. So you hired someone to kill your mother. She's 70 years old. The words burst out of him like they'd been building pressure for days. She's got that huge house all to herself. She doesn't need it. She doesn't need all that money. It's just sitting there while I'm drowning. Behind the glass, I felt something inside me shatter. Clark's voice was ice cold. Your mother worked her whole life for that house. She and your father... My father is dead, Miles shouted. He's been dead for 30 years, and Mom just sits in that house with her memories and her budget spreadsheets rationing everything when she's sitting on over $500,000 in equity. I'm her son. I'm supposed to inherit it anyway. I just needed it now instead of... He stopped himself. Instead of after she dies naturally, Clark finished. Is that what you were going to say? Miles's jaw clenched. I want my lawyer. He's on his way. But Miles, I need to tell you something. Clark leaned forward. Your mother is here. She's watching. She heard every word you just said. Miles's head jerked toward the mirror, toward me. Mom? His voice cracked. Mom, please. I didn't mean it like that. I was desperate. These people were going to hurt me. I didn't have a choice. I stood up. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady when I spoke. Can I go in there? Clark came out, left the door open. Are you sure? I need to say this to his face. She nodded and stepped aside. I walked into that interrogation room on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Miles stood up as much as the handcuffs would let him. Mom, thank God. Tell them this is a mistake. Tell them I would never— Sit down, Miles. Something in my voice made him sink back into his chair. I stood on the other side of that table, looking at the stranger wearing my son's face. I gave you everything, I said quietly. After your father died, you were all I had left. I worked 2 jobs to put you through college. I helped with your apartment, your car every time you needed money. I made excuses for you when you didn't visit, when you forgot my birthday, when you couldn't be bothered to call. I told myself you were busy, you were building your life. Mom, I would have given you the house if you'd asked Miles, if you'd come to me and told me you were in trouble, if you'd been honest about the gambling. My voice broke. I would have sold it and given you every penny, because that's what mothers do. We sacrifice for our children. Tears were streaming down his face now. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I didn't know what else to do. You didn't want to ask me for help. You didn't want to admit you'd failed, that you disappointed me. So instead you decided to have me killed. I didn't want you to suffer. Derek said it would be quick, like an accident. The words hung in the air between us, obscene in their casualness. You hired a man to murder me, I said. Each word felt like a stone dropping into deep water. Your own mother. And the only reason I'm alive is because that man had more conscience than my own son. Mom, please. I don't have a son. My voice was steady now, cold and clear. My son died the moment he decided my life was worth less than his gambling debts. I turned toward the door. Mom, please don't leave me here, Mom. I walked out of that room and didn't look back. Didn't let myself hear him screaming my name, begging, pleading. In the hallway, Crawford was waiting. Mrs. Lawson, I want to go back to the safe house now. Of course. As Officer Brennan drove me through the dark streets of Burlington back to that beige temporary apartment, I stared out the window at the lights of the city blurring past. I'd spent 30 years raising Miles. 30 years of love, sacrifice, hope. 30 years believing that underneath whatever struggles he had, there was still the good boy who'd cried at his father's funeral, who'd promised to always take care of me. But that boy was gone. Maybe he'd been gone for years and I'd been too blinded by love to see it. The only thing that saved me was an old woman in a grocery store who'd somehow known what was coming. When your son leaves tonight, do not touch the snow in your yard. Your life depends on it. She'd been right. I couldn't sleep. Lay in the unfamiliar bed in the safe house, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the last 2 days. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick it up. Hello? Mrs. Lawson, it's Derek Haynes. I sat up straight. How are you? They let me make a call. I'm cooperating fully, so they're being decent about it. I'll probably still do 15 years, but— He paused. I didn't call to talk about that. I called because you need to know something. What now? After I told Miles I wouldn't do the job, he sent a text to someone else. We found it on his phone. Sent yesterday morning at 9:47 a.m. My blood went cold. What did it say? Derek out. Need someone reliable. $15,000 tonight. And there was a response, address, Miles sent your address. 47 Birch Street. Who? We don't know yet. The number is another burner phone. But Mrs. Lawson Miles hired someone else. Someone who's still out there. Someone who's expecting $15,000 for killing you. The room seemed to spin. Detective Clark knows, Derek continued. They're tracking the phone, putting protection on your house. But I wanted you to hear it from me, because this is my fault. If I'd gone to the police right away instead of just walking away— You saved my life, I said quietly. You had a conscience when my own son didn't. I'm sorry about your boy, Mrs. Lawson. truly. So am I. After he hung up, I sat in that dark room holding my phone thinking about Miles somewhere in a cell, and about another man, someone I didn't know, someone who'd agreed to murder a 70-year-old woman for money out there in the night. Someone who might still be coming for me. I never went back to sleep after Derek's call. Just sat propped against the headboard in that safe house bed, every creak of the building making me jump, every car passing outside, making my heart race. At 2:14 a.m., my phone rang again. Crawford. Eleanor, we've got movement. A man just approached your house on Birch Street. We had officers stationed nearby. They're moving in now. I could hear sirens through the phone, faint and distant. Did they catch him? Hold on, muffled voices, radio chatter. Then Crawford came back. We've got him. Vincent Cole, 38 years old, former military. He had a Glock 19 with a suppressor, Mrs. Lawson. This wasn't going to be subtle like Derek's plan. He was going to make it look like a home invasion gone wrong. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. Is he did Miles? He's talking. Says Miles contacted him through a darknet forum yesterday morning, offered $15,000 paid in cryptocurrency. Half up front, half after. Vincent was supposed to make it look like you surprised a burglar and got shot in the struggle. Shot. Miles had hired someone to shoot me. Eleanor, you're safe now. We've got Vincent in custody. Miles is already under arrest. It's over. But it didn't feel over. It felt like the ground had opened beneath me and I was still falling. By morning, Detective Clark had pieced together the whole network. Jackson Reed, the lawyer who'd connected Miles to Derek Haynes, was arrested at his downtown office at 8:34 a.m. Apparently, he'd been running a side business for years, connecting desperate people with criminals who could solve problems for the right price. He took a 20% commission and kept meticulous records, which made the police's job much easier. Clark called me at 9:15 a.m. Mrs. Lawson, we have the full picture now. Would you like me to walk you through it? I was sitting at the small dining table in the safe house, drinking my 4th cup of coffee, still in the same clothes I'd worn yesterday. Officer Brennan had offered to drive me to my house to get things, but I couldn't face going back there yet. Yes, I said. I need to understand. Miles accumulated $240,000 in gambling debts over the last 3 years. Online poker sports betting, some casino trips to Atlantic City. He got in deep with a loan shark operation out of Boston. They were threatening him, we found text messages. Pay in 2 weeks or we'll make an example of you. That kind of thing. I closed my eyes. How had I not known? How had my own son been drowning, and I'd never noticed? But I knew how. Because Miles had stopped letting me in years ago. Because the distance between us had grown so wide I couldn't see across it anymore. 3 weeks ago, Clark continued, Miles went to Jackson Reed. They'd met at some networking event for young professionals. Miles was desperate, looking for fast money, and somehow the conversation turned to other options. Jackson told him that for the right price, problems could be made to go away. And I was the problem. You weren't a problem, Mrs. Lawson. You were an asset. The house, the equity, it was the solution to Miles's debts. He just needed access to it sooner than nature would allow. The clinical way she said it made it almost bearable. Almost. Jackson connected him to Derek Haynes. Miles paid $8,000 up front, promised another $7,000 after. The plan was for Derek to make it look like you'd fallen or maybe surprised a burglar. Something the police wouldn't question too hard for a 70-year-old woman living alone. But Derek changed his mind. Yes. And when he did, Miles panicked. That's when he started looking for alternatives. He found Vincent Cole on a darknet forum, one of those places where you can hire people for illegal jobs. Vincent was more expensive, but more reliable, or so Miles thought. I wrapped my hands around my coffee mug, seeking warmth that wouldn't come. Mrs. Lawson, there's something else you should know. We found Miles's financial records. He's been living well beyond his means for years. The luxury apartment, the Audi designer clothes, expensive restaurants, all on credit. He's over $80,000 in credit card debt alone on top of the gambling debts. He always seemed so successful, I whispered. I thought he was doing well. He was very good at pretending, but underneath he was hemorrhaging money, and when the pressure got too high, he made a terrible choice. The worst choice. The unforgivable choice. What happens now? Miles will be charged with conspiracy to commit murder and solicitation of murder. Given the evidence we have, the texts, the bank transfers, the testimony from Derek and Vincent, his lawyer will probably advise him to take a plea deal. He's looking at 25 to 30 years minimum. 25 to 30 years. Miles would be in his 60s when he got out. An old man like the mother he'd tried to have killed. And the others, Derek is cooperating fully. He'll probably get 15 years with the possibility of parole. Vincent is looking at 25. Jackson Reed, he's the one who facilitated everything. He'll get at least 12 years for his role. 4 men, 4 lives destroyed. And at the center of it all, my son willing to murder his own mother for money. Rosemary Fletcher showed up at the safe house at 10:47 a.m. with a casserole, a change of clothes she'd grabbed from my house, and her signature no-nonsense practicality. "Eleanor Lawson, you look like death warmed over. When did you last eat?" "I don't remember." She set the casserole in the oven to warm, then sat across from me at the table and took my hands in hers. "I heard what happened. The whole neighborhood knows. That boy of yours." She pressed her lips together, clearly editing what she wanted to say. "Well, what's done is done. Everyone must think I'm a terrible mother, that I raised a monster. Everyone thinks you're a miracle for surviving. And Eleanor," her grip tightened, "you didn't raise a monster. You raised a boy who made monstrous choices. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes, because you loved him, sacrificed for him, did everything right. What he became, that was his choice, not yours." I wanted to believe her, but 30 years of motherhood had taught me that everything your child does reflects back on you somehow. Every success, every failure, every terrible decision. "That woman at Morrison's," I said suddenly. "The one who warned me about the snow. Did you ever find out who she was?" Rosemary shook her head. "I asked around the neighborhood. Nobody knows her. It's the strangest thing she appeared that one day said what she said and vanished, like she was never really there at all." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I asked Ashley at Morrison's. She said she'd worked there 6 years and never saw that woman before that day or after. Never. Said it was like she materialized just for that moment, then disappeared." The impossible explanation whispered at the edge of my mind, angel messenger, divine intervention. But I'd never been particularly religious even after Robert died. I'd stopped going to church, stopped praying, stopped believing that anyone was watching over me, until a stranger in a grocery store had saved my life with 6 words about snow. "Maybe she was just passing through," I said, but I didn't believe it. "Maybe," Rosemary said. "Or maybe God works in mysterious ways, and sometimes those ways look like confused old women in threadbare coats." 2 days later, Miles took a plea deal. 28 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Detective Clark called to tell me. "He'll be sentenced formally in 3 weeks, but the deal is done. His lawyer said he was—" She paused. "He was asking about you. Wanting to know if you'd visit him." "No. I understand. For what it's worth, Mrs. Lawson, I've been doing this job for 12 years. I've seen a lot of terrible things. But what your son did, what he was willing to do, that shook even me. You don't owe him anything." But that was the thing about being a mother. You always felt like you owed them something. Like maybe if you'd done one thing differently, loved them better, seen the warning signs earlier, they wouldn't have ended up where they did. I knew rationally that Miles's choices were his own. But rationality doesn't heal the wound of betrayal. On December 20th, I finally went back to my house on Birch Street. Crawford drove me. "You don't have to do this today," he said as we pulled into the driveway. "You can take more time." "No, I need to face it." The house looked exactly the same. The blue-gray siding, the white trim, the porch swing where I'd read to Miles when he was little. But it felt different now. Tainted. Like the walls had absorbed the knowledge of what had almost happened here. I made myself walk through every room. The living room where Miles had stood 2 weeks ago, insisting I shovel the driveway. The kitchen where I'd made him cookies when he was 10. The bedroom where a stranger had tested the window, planning how to get in and kill me while I slept. In Miles's old bedroom, I'd kept it mostly the same, hoping he'd visit more often. I found a box of his childhood things. Photos, report cards, drawings. A Mother's Day card from 3rd grade covered in crayon hearts. "To the best mom in the world. I love you more than infinity. Love, Miles." I sat on his twin bed holding that card and finally let myself cry. Not gentle tears, but great heaving sobs that tore through me like a storm. I cried for the little boy who'd made that card. I cried for the man who'd tried to have me killed. I cried for 30 years of love that had somehow curdled into this nightmare. When the tears finally stopped, I felt hollow, empty, like something essential had been carved out of me and would never grow back. But I also felt something else, something small but growing, something that felt almost like relief, because I was alive. Against all odds, against my own son's plans, I was still breathing, still here, still myself. And that had to count for something. I put the house on the market in January. The realtor, a kind woman named Patricia, who didn't ask too many questions about why I was selling, said we'd have offers within a week. The neighborhood was hot, she said. Young families were moving in, renovating, breathing new life into these old Victorians. Where will you go? She asked. Somewhere smaller. A condo, maybe? Something that's just mine. I couldn't stay in that house. Too many ghosts. Too many memories of Miles growing up, of Robert and me building a life together, of the family we'd been before death and distance and desperation tore us apart. 3 days later, I found a one-bedroom condo overlooking Lake Champlain. Modern, bright, with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in so much light. It was everything my old house wasn't, new, unencumbered by history, full of possibility. I signed the papers on January 22nd and moved in February 1st. Rosemary helped me pack along with a few other neighbors who'd been kind in the aftermath. They didn't ask about Miles, didn't bring up the attempted murder, just showed up with boxes and packing tape and the blessed normalcy of small talk about weather and grandchildren and what shows they were watching. The Andersons came back from Florida and were horrified to learn what had happened. We had no idea Miles even had our number, Mr. Anderson said. We certainly never told him we'd be in Florida. He must have just guessed. More likely he'd stalked my social media, I thought, or hired someone to find out. The man who'd planned my murder had been thorough in his preparations. On Valentine's Day, a day I'd never particularly enjoyed even when Robert was alive, I found myself back at Morrison's grocery. I don't know why I went. Maybe because it was familiar. Maybe because I needed to close some kind of loop. Maybe because I was hoping she'd be there again, the mysterious woman who'd saved my life. Ashley was at her usual register. She smiled when she saw me. Mrs. Lawson, I haven't seen you in forever. How are you? Better, I said, and it was almost true. I moved to a condo downtown, just needed to pick up a few things. I wandered the aisles, picking up items without really thinking. Coffee, bread, fresh flowers, something I'd never bought for myself before, but suddenly wanted. Robert used to bring me roses on Valentine's Day, even after 30 years of marriage. At the register, as Ashley was ringing me up, I said, "That woman, the one I paid for back in December. Did you ever see her again?" Ashley's smile faded. You know, that's the weirdest thing. I've been thinking about her. I've worked here 6 years, Mrs. Lawson. 6 years. I know all the regulars, even most of the occasional shoppers. But that woman, she shook her head. I'd never seen her before that day, and I've never seen her since. Never? Never. It's like she appeared just for that moment, then vanished. I even asked my manager if maybe she was from a different shift, but nobody knew her. Nobody had ever seen her. I thought about the threadbare coat, the faded scarf, those clear, sharp eyes that had seen right through me to some terrible future. What do you think she was? I asked quietly. Ashley looked at me for a long moment. I think she was exactly what you needed when you needed it. Whether that's an angel or a prophet or just a really intuitive old lady, she shrugged. Does it matter? She saved your life? Yes, I said. She did. As I walked out of Morrison's with my groceries, I looked up and down the street, half expecting to see her standing there in her threadbare coat. But there was only the February cold, the dirty snow piled along the curbs, and ordinary people going about their ordinary lives. My new condo came with a flyer under the door. One morning, senior community activities at Burlington Community Center. Make new friends. Learn new skills. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 2 to 4 p.m. I almost threw it away, but something made me keep it. Some small voice that said I couldn't spend the rest of my life alone hiding from the world because my son had betrayed me. On March 3rd, I walked into the Burlington Community Center for the first time. The room was full of people my age, some older, some younger, all looking for connection in their later years. There were folding tables set up for different activities, bridge watercolor painting, book club, knitting circle. First time, a man about my age with kind eyes and a Red Sox cap approached me. I'm Warren, welcome. Eleanor, And yes, first time. I just moved to the area. Well, you picked a good day. We're doing a beginner's watercolor class if you're interested. No experience necessary. Our instructor, Carol, is very patient. I almost said no, almost walked back out. But Warren had kind eyes, and the thought of going back to my empty condo felt unbearable. Sure, I said. Why not? Carol was a woman in her late 60s with wild gray hair and paint-stained fingers. She taught us how to mix colors, how to let the water do some of the work, how to embrace the happy accidents. Watercolor is forgiving, she said. You can't control everything. Sometimes you have to let go and see what happens. I painted a lake, probably Lake Champlain, though it didn't really look like anything recognizable. But there was something soothing about watching the colors bleed together, about creating something that hadn't existed before. At the end of the session, Warren looked at my painting. That's good for a first try. It's terrible, I laughed. But it was fun. That's all that matters. You coming back Thursday? I hesitated. Then yes, I think I will. Walking home, I realized I felt lighter than I had in months. Not happy exactly, but less alone. Less like I was drowning. On April 7th, I did something I'd been avoiding for months. I wrote Miles a letter. Not to send to him, I still couldn't face the thought of direct contact. But Detective Clark had suggested it might help with closure. Even if he never reads it, she'd said writing it might help you process. I sat at my new dining table overlooking the lake and tried to find words for the impossible. Miles, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know if I'll ever send it. But I need to write it anyway. For 30 years, I believed I knew you. I knew the boy who cried at his father's funeral. The teenager who pretended he didn't need me but would still call when he was sick. The young man who slowly drifted away, but who I believed deep down still loved me. I was wrong. The man who hired someone to kill his own mother is a stranger to me. I don't know where my son went or if he was ever really there at all. Maybe I loved an idea of you that never existed. Maybe I was so desperate not to lose you after losing Robert that I couldn't see who you were becoming. You said you didn't have a choice, but you did. You could have asked me for help. You could have declared bankruptcy. You could have faced the consequences of your choices instead of trying to make me pay for them with my life. I would have given you everything, Miles. The house, the money, everything. All you had to do was ask. But you didn't want my charity. You wanted your inheritance. And you wanted it badly enough to hire 2 different men to murder me. I'll never understand that. I'll spend the rest of my life trying not to understand it, because understanding it might break me beyond repair. What I do know is this: I'm still here. Against your plans, against all odds, I'm still here. And I'm going to live the rest of my life, however many years I have left, without you in it. Not because I don't love you, but because loving you almost killed me. Goodbye, Miles. Mom, I folded the letter, put it in an envelope, and put the envelope in my desk drawer. Maybe someday I'd send it. Maybe not. But writing it had helped something shift inside me. Had helped me begin to separate the son I'd loved from the man who'd betrayed me. They weren't the same person. Maybe they never had been. On a warm May afternoon, I was at the community center for Carol's watercolor class when Warren approached me. Eleanor, there's someone here who'd like to meet you. I looked up from my painting, a better attempt at flowers this time, and saw a woman standing in the doorway. She was younger than I expected. Maybe 65, with steel gray hair pulled back in a braid and sharp, intelligent eyes. She wore jeans and a cardigan and carried herself with quiet confidence. Mrs. Lawson, my name is Margaret Whitaker. I wonder if I could speak with you for a moment. We stepped into the hallway. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I'm not sure how to say this, so I'll just say it directly. I'm the woman from Morrison's grocery, the one who warned you about the snow. My heart stopped. But you looked older, yes. I was wearing a wig, makeup padding under my clothes. I wanted to look like someone you'd remember but couldn't identify. Someone who'd seem confused, harmless. I don't understand. How did you know? How could you have known what was going to happen? Margaret gestured to a bench near the window. We sat. 6 years ago, she said, my husband was murdered. Shot in our home during what the police said was a robbery. They never caught whoever did it. But I always knew it wasn't random. Tom had been asking questions about his business partner's finances, getting suspicious, threatening to go to the authorities. She took a breath. 2 years later, the business partner died. Cancer. On his deathbed, he confessed to his daughter what he'd done. Told her he'd hired someone to kill my Tom. The daughter contacted me, told me everything. But by then, the statute of limitations had run out on conspiracy charges. And the actual killer, they never found him. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. After that, I couldn't let it go. I started researching, learning about how these things work, how desperate people find criminals to solve their problems. I found online forums, darknet sites, networks of lawyers and middlemen who connect people to killers for hire. She looked at me directly. 3 weeks before that day at Morrison's, I was monitoring one of these forums. I saw a post from someone looking for someone to handle a situation in Burlington, Vermont. An elderly woman living alone. Details matched your neighborhood, your demographic. I started digging. Found Jackson Reed's name connected to similar jobs. Found Miles Lawson's financial records. They're not as private as people think if you know where to look. My mouth was dry. You knew. You knew what Miles was planning. I couldn't go to the police. I didn't have concrete proof, just suspicions and circumstantial evidence. They would have dismissed me as a conspiracy theorist. But I couldn't let another woman die the way my Tom died. Her voice wavered slightly. So I followed Miles, learned his routine, saw he was going to visit you that day, and I staged that meeting at Morrison's. The groceries. You weren't really short on money. No, I had exact change. I just needed a reason to interact with you, to make you remember me, to give you that warning in a way that would stick. I stared at her, trying to process it all. You saved my life. You saved your own life by listening, by trusting your instincts. I just gave you the information you needed to make the right choice. But how did you know Miles would tell me to shovel? How did you know Derek would come that specific night? I didn't know the specifics, but I know how these jobs work. The killer needs to scout, first check security, look for vulnerabilities. I guessed he'd come at night during the storm when visibility was low. And I guessed Miles would want any evidence, like footprints destroyed, before you noticed them. It was an educated guess, but... She smiled sadly. I've spent 6 years studying how murderers think. You learn patterns. We sat in silence for a moment. Why are you telling me this now? I finally asked. Because you needed to know. Because living with mystery is its own kind of torture. I know that from experience. And because... She hesitated. I wanted you to know that you're not alone, that there are people who understand what it's like to be betrayed by someone you loved, someone you trusted. I felt tears prickling my eyes. Thank you. For everything. For saving me when you didn't have to. I had to, she said simply, because nobody saved Tom, and I'll be damned if I let that happen to someone else when I had the power to prevent it. She stood up. There's a support group for people who've experienced extreme family betrayal. It meets here every other Wednesday evening. I think you'd find it helpful. I certainly have. I'll think about it. Good. She squeezed my shoulder. You survived, Eleanor. Don't just survive, live. The house on Birch Street sold on June 14th to a young couple with a baby. They were thrilled with the porch swing, the oak tree in the front yard, the original hardwood floors. At the closing, I signed the papers that transferred ownership of 37 years of my life to strangers. Part of me felt like I was betraying Robert's memory, selling the home we'd built together. But another part, the part that was learning to survive, knew I was making the right choice. I couldn't live in a house where my son had planned my murder. Couldn't sleep in a bedroom where a stranger had tested the windows looking for a way in to kill me. With the money from the sale, after paying off the mortgage and the lawyer fees, I had enough to buy my condo outright and still have a comfortable nest egg. More than enough for my simple needs. I donated most of the furniture. I didn't want it in my new place. Didn't want the memories it carried. Kept only a few things: Robert's favorite chair, the quilt his mother had made us as a wedding gift, a box of photos from when Miles was young. I couldn't throw away those photos. Couldn't erase the memory of the boy he'd been, even knowing what he'd become. Maybe that made me weak, or maybe it just made me human. By August, I'd built a life I never expected. I went to watercolor class twice a week. Joined the support group Margaret had recommended, where I met others who'd been betrayed by family members in ways most people couldn't imagine. I volunteered at the library 3 mornings a week, shelving books and helping elderly patrons figure out the computer system. Warren became a friend. So did Carol and 2 other women from the art class, Dorothy and Susan. We started having lunch together on Fridays at a little cafe by the lake. I wasn't lonely anymore. Wasn't sitting alone in a big empty house, waiting for a son who never called making excuses for why he didn't visit. I was building a family of choice instead of blood. People who showed up not because they had to, but because they wanted to. On August 3rd, my 70th birthday, I'd somehow survived to 71, despite everything. My new friends threw me a surprise party at the community center. Nothing fancy, just cake and balloons, and people who genuinely cared that I'd been born. Warren gave me a set of professional watercolor brushes. "You've gotten really good," he said. "Time to upgrade your tools." Carol gave me a book on Impressionist painters. Dorothy and Susan gave me a gift certificate to the cafe where we had lunch. Margaret Whittaker showed up with a small wrapped box. Inside was a silver necklace with a single snowflake pendant. "So you never forget," she said quietly, "that sometimes the worst things lead to the best things, that survival is its own kind of blessing." I hugged her, this woman who'd saved my life, who'd become something like a friend in the months since she'd revealed herself. "Thank you," I whispered, "for everything." That night I stood on my balcony overlooking Lake Champlain, wearing my snowflake necklace, watching the sun set over the water in shades of orange and pink and purple that I was slowly learning to capture with watercolors. Miles was in prison, would be for decades. I'd heard through Detective Clark that he was struggling, that he'd been in the infirmary once for a fight once, for refusing to eat. Part of me wanted to care, but the larger part, the part that was learning to protect myself, couldn't afford to. I'd loved him with everything I had for 30 years, and it had nearly killed me. So now I was learning to love myself instead, learning to live for myself, learning that family wasn't just the people you were born to, but the people who chose to stay. The breeze off the lake was cool and gentle. Summer was ending, and soon it would be December again. Soon it would be a year since that snowy day at Morrison's grocery, when everything changed. I wasn't the same woman I'd been then. That woman had been lonely, living in the past, clinging to a son who'd stopped being her son years ago. This woman, the one I was becoming, was stronger, wiser, surrounded by people who actually wanted her alive. And that was worth more than any inheritance, any house, any amount of money. I raised my glass of wine to the setting sun, to the year I'd survived, to the life I was building. "Thank you," I said quietly to Margaret, to Derek Haynes and his unexpected conscience, to the mysterious old woman in the grocery store, whoever or whatever she'd really been. "Thank you for the warning about the snow." And then I went inside to my bright modern condo, to my new life, and I didn't look back.